In a time where mysterious dungeon entrances randomly appear around the world, humanity discovers that they can raid it to earn money and prevent evil creatures from exiting the said portals. When one of these dungeon entrances appears in the home of the best-selling author Chung Hai, he is left with no choice but to become an adventurer and raid the dungeon himself. However, Chung Hai is aware of the casualties, armed with the knowledge that the death toll for adventurers is at an all-time high. Does the skinny writer have what it takes to transform into a seasoned adventurer? Let's find out. It's year 2022 in Dongshan City, and Chung Hai is having the biggest crisis of his life. A purple-like portal just appeared in his house, and it was one of those dreaded dungeon entrances. Nobody knows how or why these things appeared, but back in 2012, dungeon entrances randomly appeared all over the globe. After a series of explorations, looting, development, and riots, the government discovered 5 things. First, the entrance can't be destroyed, but raiding the dungeons inside them can shut them down. Second, if these dungeons aren't raided, monsters will escape into the human world. Third, those who survive the dungeons will become heroes. Fourth, you'll get higher rewards if you kill high-level monsters. And lastly, the so-called dungeon boss is indestructible, and not even a nuclear weapon can take it down. After 10 days after the first appearance of the entrances, more dungeons were raided until it became a norm. Over the years, details about these dungeons and the adventurers braving them became public knowledge. It turned into a trendy pursuit, with increasing numbers of people drawn to the adventure lifestyle, due to the promising financial rewards. However, behind this glamorous facade, people remain unaware of the casualties in those dungeons. Chung Hai knows all too well about the grim reality of the death toll in dungeon raids. If his memory serves him right, 5 years ago, the beginner-ranked dungeon's death rate was 50%. That is too big of a risk, and he doesn't even need the money because he already has a steady income as a best-selling author. Chung Hai doesn't want to deal with it, so he plans to call the official Adventurers Guild and make arrangements to relocate to a new apartment. He also heard that if a civilian reports a dungeon entrance, they will get the mysterious treasures inside it. Seems like a good deal, right? Just then, Chung Hai receives a notification alert informing him that a guild staff got arrested by the police for reselling dungeon entrances. What a good way to ruin his business racket. This leaves him reassessing his plans. If he ends up with a guild staff who happens to be a scammer, it would literally be like walking into a trap. Selling to companies isn't an option either because they can only use it 10 times. To ensure that Chung Hai won't use it, they'll be keeping a close eye on him and might even kill him for profit. Okay, so a business venture isn't so good after all. However, he can't just leave it because the monsters might escape into the human world. If someone died because of that, he'll end up in jail for sure. Before he does anything rash, Chung Hai checks what kind of dungeon he has. If the death rate is high, then he might have to move to another city and leave the matter to the police. But if it's reasonable, then he'll opt to raid it himself. As Chung Hai checks the dungeon on the internet, he discovers that it's a level 2 hunting type dungeon with a favorable survival rate of 80%. I guess I see where this is going. After 2 days, a package arrives for Chung Hai. However, the delivery guy's random question makes his cheeks freeze because he asks if the package is for a dungeon raid. Because why would he buy a chainmail, right? Chung Hai makes a quick excuse, saying that he likes to play adventures with his friends. Right, definitely convinced him there, my dude. For some reason, the delivery guy buys this stupid alibi and goes off clueless. Chung Hai can't blame the guy for being nosy, as he knows that the average person dreams of becoming an adventurer. When he's finally alone, Chung Hai tries the chainmail on. Look at that drip. The material feels a bit heavy, and it's tight on his chest, but it does allow him to move freely. He also bought an axe from a nearby firefighter store, which finishes the whole look. With his OOTD ready, Chung Hai prepares for the adventure that awaits. Upon entering the dungeon, Chung Hai finds himself in the middle of a forest. He's quite hyped, and he's ready to kill some monsters. However, he does the basics first, such as activating the status window. Based on his foundation attributes, the highest one is his wisdom, which is great because you can't really improve that, like you do with strength and agility. I guess when you're dumb, you really can't change that. Huh. Chung Hai gets a little too cocky about his greatest attribute, but he keeps his cool. He then checks out his first mission, but he gets pissed when he discovers that he has to kill a murloc. Chung Hai is allergic to seafood, so this isn't the best challenge to start with. Hours later, he spots a lone murloc, so he quickly lunges at it. To his surprise, this creature has some sick reflexes, and it dodges Chung Hai's attack. Not only that, it attacks him back with the spear that it's holding. After fighting the murloc all day long, Shanghai finally manages to kill it. If a single murloc is this strong, then imagine a horde of it. As Shanghai checks his status window, he discovers that his level has been upgraded. That would have been good news. But then he finds that his profession is not registered in the status window. I guess being a writer isn't legit in this world. Shanghai brushes it off, determined to get the hell out and call it a day. As he leaves the place, he thinks about getting a private coach to help increase his other attributes. When he finally gets better in combat, then he'll return to the dungeon. Not long after, Shanghai makes it back to his house, exhausted after having his longest exercise in a while. Just then, he receives a notification, as he's supposed to get an item after every mission that he completes. He expects a potion that will permanently boost his other attributes, but the status window merely gifts him with a measly white thermos. Well, at least he has a water bottle that can store 500 millimeters of water. Right. Shanghai isn't too happy about it. That's for sure. Days later, Shanghai heads to Whale's gym, where he got an instructor to help him increase his other attributes. He never thought that his city had fitness instructors who specialize in training for adventurers, but it turns out there are. This trainer is quite costly enough to pay for a copyright fee, but Shanghai figures that he has to invest in it to earn more from the raids. The trainer's assistant suddenly asks if he has any gym experience. I think it's quite obvious. Shanghai bluntly says no, and the assistant finds this odd, as a newbie like Shanghai has spent so much money on this trainer when he could have gotten a normal trainer. The assistant then teases him, saying he seems to be in a rush. Shanghai replies that he has money to spend, so why not invest it in a good trainer? Realizing that his excuse is justifiable, the assistant finally welcomes Shanghai to meet the best trainer in all of Dongshan. Shanghai's knees wobble, nervous to meet the legendary coach, Onran. But wait, this guy? Why does Coach On look like a European twink? Shanghai is disappointed, as he thought this guy would be muscular enough to throw him to a wall. Just then, a huge shadow casts behind him, and it's no other than the colossal trainer himself, Coach Onran. Well, Shanghai definitely got what he wanted, but at what cost? Coach On immediately makes Shanghai do a bunch of bench pressing, leaving him gasping for his life. When Coach On calls for a break, he tells Shanghai that his bench press performance is trash. Darn, that's harsh. Shanghai knew he was weak, but he didn't expect himself to be such a wimp. Meanwhile, Coach On's other student, dashing Prince Charming, comments that Shanghai's foundation is bad. With his single maximum weight being 35 kilograms, is not even ranked as average compared to the other adventurers. Coach On agrees, adding that Shanghai won't be able to catch up to the newbie adventurers if he doesn't master the 3 foundation attribute training. Hearing this, Shanghai then asks how long it will take to make himself a competent adventurer. Coach On replies that it will take an entire season, and he has to train every day to earn a score of 11 in the 3 foundation attributes. Determined to reach his goal, Shanghai tells Coach On to train him according to his season's standard. Prince Charming, whose actual name is Shu Mao, is pleased to have Shanghai join him during their workouts. He reveals his status as a contracted adventurer, prompting Shanghai to reciprocate by mentioning his success as a best-selling author. Later that day, Shanghai and Shu Mao head to a burger joint for some snacks. Shu Mao wonders why Shanghai availed Coach On's expensive services when he's only a newbie. If he's not rushing for time, he can get a private trainer to get stronger while spending minimally. Usually, people sign a long-term association with a company, like Shu Mao did with Whale's Gym, and then they will get a professional trainer like Coach On. However, Shanghai replies that his books are selling well, so he's not really short on money. He wants to be a competent adventurer, so he wants Coach On to set his foundations right. Shu Mao sighs, disappointed upon knowing that Shanghai merely wanted to train and didn't encounter a wild dungeon. Just then, Shu Mao gives Shanghai some tips about being an adventurer. Unbeknownst to our naive MC, Shu Mao's title is literally ignores helpless people. He then explains that he can equip a title into his status window upon entering the dungeons, and he can enjoy the perks that come with it. However, this is visible to other adventurers, so people who specialize in hunting low-ranked dungeons often hide this because it's weird to display. Additionally, if your title is a little too enticing, someone might follow you to locate the entrance of your highly coveted dungeon. Noticing that Shanghai is unfazed, Shu Mao concludes that he is nothing but a wimpy author who doesn't know the first thing about being an adventurer. Thankfully, Shanghai didn't expose his title, or else Shu Mao would know how long it took him to take a single murloc down. Just then, Shu Mao urges Chung Hai to return to the gym, as Coach On might be done with his gym contract. Meanwhile, Coach On does some digging on Chung Hai and finds out he makes good money as an author. His assistant thinks it's unlikely for Chung Hai to stumble upon a wild dungeon entrance, but he's in a hurry like he's preparing for a raid within a month. Coach On isn't sure about Chung Hai's true motives, but is interested to see where this leads. He just hopes Chung Hai won't be shocked when he learns his title, the Newbie Killer. If all goes according to plan, he might just take Chung Hai's dungeon entrance for himself. Upon arriving at Whale's gym, Coach On says that the contract is ready, and if Chung Hai finds no issues, he can sign it. Chung Hai doesn't pay much attention to Coach On's title, which implies that he's unlikely to have encountered a wild dungeon. Coach On asks Shu Mao if he did anything excessive, and the latter replies that he has no reason to. Realizing they can't get anything from Chung Hai, Coach On ultimately decides to cut this guy some slack. Meanwhile, Chung Hai signs the contract. The assistant coach tells him to take care of it, and she also shares that Coach On will conduct a physical test on him later. After conducting the test, Coach On concludes that Chung Hai is indeed a wimp, like we didn't already know. He decides not to do any speed tests for now, and he'd rather focus on Chung Hai's strength and fitness training. Desperate to improve, Chung Hai stresses he's free to train anytime. With this, Coach On tells him to report tomorrow at 10 a.m. After getting home, Chung Hai is disappointed that the largest fitness institution in China tricks newbie adventurers for profit. If his acting skills were bad, then they would kill him on the spot. Whew. So our MC isn't as dumb as we thought. If there's a AAA ranked trainer like Coach On in a small place like Dongshan, imagine what it's like around the world. Wait, if being an adventurer is this risky, then he might just lose his head after ordering that chainmail. His location has been exposed, which heightens the risks. Thankfully, he didn't order his weapon in the same store, so he might get away unscathed. There's too much drama, so Chung Hai might have to create a different strategy from now on. Later that day, he enters the dungeon for some raiding, and there he finally decides on what he must do. Originally, he was supposed to train more before setting out to complete some missions, but since there are too many traps for newbie adventurers, he might have to level up on his own. He was lucky today for avoiding a trap, but he's not going to be that fortunate all the time. With this, Chung Hai checks his mission and discovers that he must obtain one pair of Murloc eyes to exit the dungeon. However, upon checking the Murloc's corpse, Chung Hai discovers that its organs are missing. It must have been eaten by some wild dogs. But hey, at least the eyes are intact, right? If he can just hold his breath and pluck the eyes out, and he won't have to fight for today. Or so he thought. An angry Murloc suddenly appears behind him, ready to pounce. Chung Hai doesn't understand what this oversized frog is saying, but it must be mad that he killed its companion. Well, it's just one Murloc, and he can easily take it down like he did yesterday. Oh, wait. There are two of them. Chung Hai immediately runs for his life, knowing he can't take down two Murlocs at once. He barely survived his previous encounter. And so Chung Hai spends the rest of the day running from the Murlocs. When he finally stops to take a break, the Murloc attempts to attack him. However, Chung Hai points out that the Murloc got separated from its companion, granting him a crucial advantage. The Murloc screams as Chung Hai swings his axe, ultimately killing the overgrown frog. However, his triumph is short-lived as another Murloc emerges from the bushes, ready to attack. Unfazed, Chung Hai merely smirks, ready to go on another killing spree. After a successful raid, Chung Hai returns home to collect his prize. His rating increased, but the status window didn't reward him with anything, much to his dismay. Is the dungeon's drop rate really this low? If this is the case, then how do adventurers earn money? He must be missing something. So he plans to ask Coach On and Shu Mao about it. However, Chung Hai is skeptical about that, so he decides to level up first before they think of him as clueless. The next day, Chung Hai reports to Whale's gym for his workout session. However, the assistant tells him that Coach On and Shu Mao will be away for a few days. Chung Hai spares no time to lose, and he immediately heads to the VIP room to do some physical training by himself. For the following days, he furiously trains himself, much to Coach On and Shu Mao's surprise. Coach On is shocked that Chung Hai trained under such intensity. Shu Mao agrees, adding that he might raise his strength and physique to an 11 if he keeps up with this pace. Coach On even believes he can reach a 12 for the foundational attributes if he doesn't get delayed by injury or illness. Just then, Shu Mao asks Coach On if he plans to invite Chung Hai to join the Whale's Gym adventurers. He has the potential, based on how rich and motivated he is. If Chum Hai doesn't face accidents, he can be an average adventurer. However, Coach On discloses that he already offered the opportunity to Chun Hai, but he refuses because he wants to be an independent adventurer and rely on the black market. Shu Mao is disappointed to hear this, but he shrugs it off and says that everyone has their reasons. Meanwhile, Chun Hai collapses from exhaustion, completely drained. Shu Mao expresses concern, warning Chun Hai that he's pushing himself too hard and could end up getting hurt. Chun Hai responds by stating his goal of becoming an adventurer within a year, explaining that delaying his progress would only increase the cost of training. This makes Shu Mao wonder if Chun Hai is rushing to make money from the black market. Later on, Chun Hai and Shu Mao head to a burger joint. Chun Hai gets preoccupied with his thoughts as he believes that Shu Mao and Coach On see him as a more competent person. Now, he only needs to execute the perfect plan at the perfect time. Shu Mao suddenly joins him, and he's wondering what Chun Hai is thinking so deeply about. Chun Hai suddenly snaps out of his thoughts and says that he's just tired. Shu Mao reminds him that he can't overwork himself, as this might increase the risks of injury. Chun Hai agrees, and he says he plans to lessen his training load soon. He suddenly asks Shu Mao if he's made his money back as an adventurer. Shu Mao replies it's too early, and he'll probably get it once he hits level 11. Chun Hai slyly asks why it takes so long, so Shu Mao explains. At lower levels, like 1 to 5, the risks are lower, so many people choose this path because it's easier. But at levels 6 to 10, missions get tougher, and knowledge about monsters becomes more valuable. Many adventurers become information gatherers then. Despite the higher risk, they can still survive if they're very careful. At level 11, adventurers can't relax because the challenges become extreme, but the payoff makes it worthwhile. Additionally, Shu Mao explains that gear, items, and skill books, anything aiding in leveling up, come with high price tags. Chun Hai is puzzled about why adventurers at levels 6 to 10 don't prepare more actively if level 11 dungeons are so dangerous. Shu Mao says there are a few reasons. Firstly, the Adventurers Association doesn't force adventurers to enter dungeons, so many choose to retire and return to a normal life when they hit level 11. He also mentions that only a few adventurers make it to elite dungeons, and compared to levels 11 to 15, which have significant risks and rewards, levels 6 to 10 can help adventurers regain their initial investment, and even make some profit through gathering information and managing logistics, all without risking their lives. With this, it makes sense to Chun Hai why Shu Mao stayed at level 6 for a long time. When Chun Hai gets home, he reflects on the wealth of knowledge he's gained through Shu Mao. It finally dawns on him why he couldn't find anything useful on the Adventurer Forum. It appears that people exploit information to make money, and newcomers might even fall victim to deception from other adventurers, seeking access to their dungeons. However, Chun Hai is particularly shocked to learn that he can only receive a reward once, despite exiting the dungeon multiple times. It seems unlikely that his dungeon will yield any rewards now. Nevertheless, Chun Hai resolves to clear it on his own, as he doesn't need the money anyway. Afterward, he plans to pursue a career as an adventurer. With this, Chun Hai puts on his armor and decides to follow Shu Mao's advice, which is to collect information first. Upon entering the dungeon, Chun Hai is taken aback to realize that he doesn't have to engage in combat for today's mission. All he needs to do is locate a lake to exit. However, the clearing condition stipulates that he must eliminate a tidal Murloc team, with only 19 days remaining until the dungeon expands. Fortunately, Chun Hai followed Shu Mao's advice and brought a drone, as finding a lake without it would be impossible. As he pilots the drone, Chun Hai spots a group of Murlocs accompanied by an orange dragon-like creature. The beast becomes agitated upon sighting the drone, and suddenly leaps into the air, launching an attack against it. Chun Hai is confused by the appearance of such a creature, uncertain if it's a Murloc, due to its different aura and higher level and combat abilities. He decides to ignore it and focus on finding the lake. A few minutes later, Chun Hai spots a giant lake, and the presence of numerous Murlocs in the area suddenly makes sense to him. Chun Hai chuckles, realizing that the mission seems too easy, and then he can finally leave the dungeon. However, the status window suddenly notifies him of a map change and an increase in the dungeon's rating. Chun Hai is puzzled, but then he trembles in horror as he sees the orange Murloc staring at him with its menacing sharp teeth. The orange Murloc suddenly dashes towards Chun Hai, slapping the drone's controller out of his hand. If he didn't react so quickly, he would have been badly injured. Poor drone. It was brand new. Chun Hai is a bit stressed out by his broken drone, but you must focus on the current crisis. He suddenly starts to worry, noticing that the orange murloc is extremely fast with its movements. To make matters worse, the orange murloc suddenly lunges toward Chun-Hai, and blood spurts out everywhere. Blood streams down Chun-Hai's face as he receives a powerful blow from the orange murloc, and the specter of death looms over him. Meanwhile, the orange murloc loses interest in Chun-Hai and delegates him to its underlings. Reflecting on his life choices, Chun-Hai regrets becoming an adventurer, if it meant meeting his end like this. Memories of the stories he used to write flood his mind, and he wonders if he'll share the fate of his long-dead main characters. Suddenly, a strange sense of empowerment washes over Chun-Hai as he realizes he's still an adventurer despite his fear of death. Swiftly seizing his axe, he strikes a nearby murloc without hesitation. Well, that was random. In a moment of desperation, Chun-Hai thinks of a trump card he can use. Luckily, his status window has received a new update that allows him to engage in one-on-one combat with a murloc. Equipping this title, Chun-Hai gains the strength, agility, and instincts of his opponent upon defeating it. This boost enhances his foundational attributes, making him feel lighter and more powerful. Chun-Hai swiftly dispatches the murlocs, cleaving them in half with his axe. He also notices that the murlocs have slowed down, and his vision has improved, a seemingly impossible turn of events that even Chun-Hai finds hard to believe. Meanwhile, the orange murloc is equally puzzled, wondering what Chun-Hai did to suddenly increase his attributes. With determination in his eyes, Chun-Hai strides towards the orange murloc, ready to kill it like he did with its minions. In its own language, the murloc screams at Chun-Hai, warning him not to be arrogant, just because he defeated its underlings. Meanwhile, Chun-Hai grows cautious of his own movements, aware that the weight of his chainmail will slow him down, despite his enhanced attributes. Consequently, he discards his heavy axe and retrieves his spear from one of the dead murlocs. Realizing he must bait the murloc and seize the opportunity to inflict heavy damage, Chun-Hai mentally prepares himself. Anger and excitement intertwine within him as he faces this life-and-death situation. Suddenly, the murloc charges at him, but Chun-Hai thrusts his spear into its mouth. He earns an injury from this attack, and he falls to the ground and bleeds heavily. Meanwhile, the murloc struggles in vain to remove the spear, before succumbing to its injuries. Upon detecting the abnormal murloc's demise, the status window rewards Chun-Hai with a new title, Survival After Death, and grants him the profession of Deathwalker. Additionally, he receives an upgrade item to help resolve his current dilemma. Following the status window's instructions, Chun-Hai places it in his thermos. Equipping the item, Chun-Hai discovers it is a rare recovery potion. Chun-Hai immediately drinks the potion, and he's shocked to see that it immediately healed his injuries. He then summons the status window, and he discovers that his sense attribute unexpectedly increased. Recalling his previous difficulty leaving the dungeon, Chun-Hai investigates the new exit condition. He learns he must survive for 3 minutes while being pursued by strong and abnormal murlocs. Additionally, he must destroy the murloc's hatching pond to clear the mission. However, Chun-Hai feels frustrated and decides to delay the task for another day. However, as he exits the dungeon's entrance, he notices that it has become bigger. He tries putting his hand in, but he's unable to. The status window then informs him that his level is insufficient, disabling him from entering. What? The dungeon upgraded. As Chun-Hai reflects on the situation, he realizes that the exit mission he just completed is actually from a higher level dungeon. No wonder the mission difficulty increased and he received a reward. The status window tells Chun-Hai that his level is insufficient, so it offers him the option to use his Deathwalker profession. As soon as he clicks yes, a dark force suddenly surrounds him, installing the profession in his status window. Chun-Hai is shocked that it boosted his sense attribute, increasing it to 16. With this attribute boosted, he can see every corner of the room with his eyes closed. If it's this good at 16 points, he can't even imagine what it would be like if it reached 20. Chun-Hai then checks out his other titles. He already knows that the one-on-one with a murloc grants him the same attributes as the strongest murloc. However, he hasn't checked out what Survival After Death does. He explores the status window and discovers that it increases his combat abilities and attributes when he's in a near-death experience, which is kind of similar to the Deathwalker one. Later that day, Chun-Hai heads to the whale's gym to work out like crazy. Shu Mao is amazed that a newbie like Chun-Hai can reach a 1-year accomplishment in just 2 months. If someone else were under his training load, they would be in the emergency room. Based on his observations, Shu Mao guesses that his physique is at least 16 or even more. It seems like Coach An missed a good asset. Shu Mao suddenly approaches Chun Hai, telling him his agility should be up at 12 points already. He adds that his current physique is enough to complete the exit conditions of a dungeon. Just then, Shu Mao reintroduces the prospect of having Chun Hai join Whale's Gym's adventurers. However, Chun Hai remains firm, saying he doesn't want to be restrained by contracts. Shu Mao is saddened by his response, saying it would have been a great chance for them to raid dungeons together. However, Chun Hai reminds him they can still do that as colleagues. He suddenly remembers that he was looking for a place to buy dungeon slots, so Chun Hai asks Shu Mao where he can purchase one. Shu Mao suggests an unspecialized alliance, which puzzles Chun Hai. If his memory serves him right, this must be the largest unspecialized group. Shu Mao proceeds to share that if Chun Hai plans to go to the black market for adventurer slots, that he should choose entrances that are low-ranked, as this guarantees that it is provided by the unspecialized alliance or their own operation. When asked why, Shu Mao explains that typically, transactions involving the sale of adventure slots carry significant risks for both the seller and the buyer. Sellers often fear that experienced adventurers might pose as novices, while buyers worry that sellers may vanish after receiving payment. However, this concern doesn't apply to transactions facilitated by a non-specialized alliance. Despite the higher commission fees associated with such transactions, they ensure that the seller remains in contact with the buyer and can be trusted in deals related to dungeon-related purchases like slots. Upon arriving home, Chun Hai immediately begins his search for a seller offering slots. Unfortunately, his city doesn't seem to have any available options, so he turns to Yun Xiao City as his best bet. Contacting a seller there, Chun Hai inquires about slot availability and is informed that they are waiting for 2 more participants to join the raid. Intrigued, Chun Hai asks about the transaction process. 2 days later, Chun Hai finds himself in a park in Yun Xiao City. Just then, a buff guy who looks like a knockoff Wolverine approaches him. The seller introduces himself as Old Driver, the alias he goes by. He then informs Chun Hai that he's the final member to join the team, and once the contract is signed, Old Driver will lead him to the dungeon. He follows Old Driver and finds himself among a group of adventurers and the contractor from the Unspecialized Alliance. The contractor announces that the buyer's final payment will be deposited into a designated account provided by the Alliance. The seller will then assist the buyers in completing the transaction. Once the buyers return from the dungeon, the final payment will be transferred to the seller's account. Emphasizing the importance of safety, the contractor warns buyers not to violate the safety agreements outlined in the contract and advises sellers not to ignore dangerous situations or act violently toward the buyers. Furthermore, he emphasizes that the specific location of the dungeon must remain undisclosed to anyone. After addressing the group, the contractor asks if there are any questions. Adventurers named Liang, Leader, and Hate respond that there are none. With the contract finalized, a magical seal appears on the arms of the adventurers. With his task complete, the contractor takes his leave. Old Driver then instructs everyone to say status window to access their adventurer information and mission details. He reassures the group that the status window is only visible to the owner, so there's no need to worry about their information being exposed. Another adventurer suggests that everyone disclose their exit missions, so they can organize accordingly. However, Chun Hai realizes that his exit and clearance mission involves a banshee, a creature not typically encountered at the beginner rank. This shocks him, as this dungeon might not be what everyone expects. Chun Hai theorizes that the current dungeon might have the same bug as the one in his house. According to the Adventurer Forum, if a dungeon has monsters not included in the beginner rank, it could either mean that it's a one-of-a-kind situation, or the adventurers that encountered it all died. We can only wish for the first one. Suddenly, the seals announce that the guy with glasses lied about his exit mission, thereby violating the safety regulations. A man intervenes, saying that someone must have triggered the safety regulations, because the raid hasn't started yet. The guy with glasses defends himself, saying that his exit mission is to collect high-value herbs. He also insists that the dungeon has a bug. Suddenly, a thug adventurer approaches him, enraged that a newbie like him already dares to lie about his exit mission. Before the situation escalates, the leader approaches the thug guy, telling him to cut some slack for the newbie because he's just starting out. The guy with glasses gets on his knees, pleading for another chance. The thug yields, stressing that there won't be any consideration for him next time. After the situation cools down, Old Driver then tells everyone to announce their real exit missions. The guy with glasses admits that his mission is to find the lake's banshee, while one adventurer says he has to hear the banshee's sound. Chum-hai reports that he has to look at the banshee for 10 seconds, while one adventurer is tasked to find the banshee itself. While taking mental notes, the thug adventurer measures the possible casualties of the mission. Liang asks if the tasks are dangerous, and the thug guy replies that it depends on how they attack. If they do well, then the mission will go smoothly. Just then, the thug faces the lake, playing an alluring song with his harmonica. One adventurer asks what he's doing. An old driver replies that he's summoning the banshee. Curious, the adventurer asks how the thug knew this trick. An old driver merely replies that it's a commercial secret. Suddenly, an ethereal-looking banshee emerges from the water, and she lunges into the air. With this simple occurrence alone, the exit missions of the leader and the guy with glasses get cleared. Meanwhile, Chum-hai stares at the banshee for 10 seconds, successfully clearing his exit mission as well. Old driver quickly tells everyone to put on their earplugs, as the banshee is about to sing. As the fat adventurer asks what will happen if they don't wear it, Chum-hai notices that his nose is bleeding. Well, I guess that answers the question. If Chum-hai didn't wear the earplugs right away, he would have been dead, like he expected. A creature that is not listed in a low-ranked dungeon is dangerous and deadly. Suddenly, the thug stops playing his harmonica, prompting the banshee to return to the water. He then asks the others if their exit missions have been completed. If they are, then they are to return to the way they came from. However, a greedy adventurer refuses to leave the place, saying that he wants to collect some valuable plants and minerals first. He adds that the thug wants them to leave the dungeon right away, so that he can have all those precious items for himself. The greedy adventurer adds that he paid for his slot, so he deserves to collect plants and minerals to get his investment back. Old driver clarifies that this was not stated in the contract, but the greedy adventurer argues that the contract didn't say anything about things they could do after the exit missions are completed. Chum-hai asks Liang if it's truly possible to collect the said items. Liang is quite surprised that Chum-hai is unaware of the tactics of adventurers, so he explains that most people can't clear a dungeon, and because of this, they resort to collecting resources and more information for profit. Meanwhile, the thug reminds the greedy adventurer that he can kill him anytime despite this being a violation of the contract. The adventurer is unfazed by his threat, so the thug reveals he didn't sign the contract with them. He suddenly retrieves a weapon from his inventory, preparing for his wicked plans. However, Liang and leader assert their authority, prompting the thug to scoff at what they're about to do. Liang replies that he hates people like him, while leader tries negotiating, saying there's nothing wrong with collecting herbs and minerals. Suddenly, old driver reminds everyone that if the greedy adventurer doesn't make it out of the dungeon alive, he won't receive any payment. However, if he dies while gathering resources, none of them will gain any profit. Leader proposes a solution, suggesting that old driver can provide protection for them, and in return, they'll share a portion of the items with him. This proposal leaves old driver stunned, but he politely declines, stating that he won't take such a risk. Leader wonders if it's truly about avoiding risks or if old driver simply doesn't want the adventurers to uncover the dungeon's secrets. Angered by this statement, old driver accuses leader of not being a newbie, but rather a novice adventurer who has joined the mission to clear it. Suddenly, the thug confronts Liang, his imposing aura radiating from his body. Old driver tries stopping him, revealing that his true name is Lao Liao. Liang is unfazed, telling Lao Liao that he should already know which one of them is stronger, based on the aura they emit. Unexpectedly, Lao Liao abruptly decides to leave the group, declaring that they can have the dungeon to themselves, because he's going home. Funny, only a minute ago, this guy was ready to throw hands. The adventurers quickly regroup, eager to explore and loot the dungeon. Meanwhile, old driver trails after Lao Liao, complaining that the adventurers are foolishly disregarding the contract rules now that they secured the exit mission. Suddenly, Lao Liao tells him to drop the act because they've walked far enough from the group. Old driver chuckles, complimenting Lao Liao's acting skills. He also says he almost believed him when he walked away from Liang, as it implied that he couldn't beat him. However, Lao Liao admits they truly can't beat Liang, but Liang is equally scared of him. Old driver then asks Lao Liao if he believes that the adventurers can clear the dungeon, and the latter replies that it's unlikely. Despite Liang's title being a combat expert, he is no match for the Banshee. While leader is charismatic, he and Liang are only at the 5th level. Lao Liao is sure that they both won't survive against the Banshee, and that only 2 or 3 adventurers will make it out of this dungeon alive. It is then revealed that old driver and Lao Liao have been doing this tactic for quite some time, selling dungeon slots while not caring about the casualties. Back in the dungeon, Leader hands out swords to the rest of the adventurers, which they eagerly try out. He then reveals to everyone that he can increase some of their foundation attribute, a prize for their participation in clearing the dungeon. Chumhai verifies Leader's claim by checking his status window, confirming that his physique has indeed increased by 1 point to 13. Considering Leader's straightforward title as Team Leader, Chumhai speculates that it might enhance the team's attributes. Not the most imaginative title, if you ask me. Suddenly, the guy with glasses asks how they're going to summon the Banshee without the harmonica. They won't be able to clear the mission if the Banshee remains in the lake. Just then, the greedy adventurer from earlier picks up a rock, saying that his title, Provocateur, allows him to force a dialogue and irritate a target. Apparently, that's a thing. The guy adds that the target will lose 2 points from their wisdom attribute and become vengeful and fearless of death. Determined to provoke a response, the adventurer hurls the rock forcefully into the lake, aiming to draw the Banshee's attention. The impact disrupts the serene surface of the lake, summoning the Banshee. As the Banshee emerges, the adventurer boldly extends his middle finger in an attempt to provoke it. This successfully triggers the Banshee, causing it to charge towards the team. Li Elling suddenly intervenes, claiming that he'll take it from here. He then instructs everyone to spread up and let the combat experts control the Banshee. He also reminds them to put on their earplugs and spread out around the perimeter. Li An attempts to land a strong blow against the Banshee, but it only turns transparent once his fists hit. The team is shocked to see that the Banshee merely passed through Li An. In a split second, the Banshee appears right in front of the greedy adventurer. Meanwhile, a swarm of Banshees converges on the lake, ready to end the adventurers. Meanwhile, Li An lands a strong punch on the irritated Banshee, sending it flying into the air. The guy with glasses and Hate are relieved to know that they're gaining the upper hand. Finally, they have the chance to leave the dungeon. But psych, the group suddenly notices a glowing red light coming their way, and it seems like trouble. Li An quickly realizes that it's a group of Banshees, and the sellers trick them into thinking that the dungeon only has one of these creatures. The Banshees inevitably reach the lake, and they swarm the area surrounding the adventurers. The group is defeated, knowing well that they're outnumbered. At this point, the earplugs won't be able to mask the fatality of the Banshee's screams. Li An urgently instructs the adventurers to run for their lives. They head into the forest, where the Banshees promptly follow. Hate is on the verge of crying, wallowing at the fact that his life is full of bad luck. He remembers Ting and Ziyu An, two people he cared about deeply, and how their tragic fate mirrors his current situation. He recalls a moment of desperation when he pleaded for his life before Gao Changyang, a criminal and seasoned level 7 adventurer. Gao was seated between two motionless women, each adorned with a red string similar to Hate's. Suddenly, Hate snaps back to reality, feeling a surge of courage as he resolves to fight back and seek vengeance for Ting and Ziyu An. And then he dies. Unfortunately for this bad boy, he's not the most skilled fighter. Meanwhile, a fat adventurer desperately waves his sword at the Banshees surrounding him, claiming that he's going to be a legendary adventurer. Can't be that when you're dead, my dude. On the other hand, the guy with glasses helplessly cowers on the ground, calling for his mommy. He claims that he shouldn't have cooperated with the president in laundering the company's money. Elsewhere, Li An bravely combats the Banshees, but this costs him his sight. Leader also suffered the same fate, his blood dripping from his eye. He's defeated, realizing that they were fooled by the sellers. He theorizes that the dungeon's difficulty is too high. To make matters worse, there's no way out as the Banshees are immune to physical attacks and have exceptionally high resistance to fire, lightning, and acid. Chumhai asks him if there are any other ways, but Leader hesitates to answer. He finally musters the courage to reveal that there's one way that they can make it out alive. In their last dungeon raid, Li An once obtained a small jar of holy oil blessed by the monks. If they coat whatever weapon with that oil, it can be fatal to the Banshees. While Leader discloses this, Li An ultimately falls victim to the Banshee's brutality, causing him to spew out blood from his tortured body. Chumhai has seen enough suffering for the day, so he promptly activates his survival after death title to clear the dungeon once and for all. He heads over to Li An, telling him about Leader's advice and asking for the holy oil. However, Li Yang's eyeballs aren't exactly functional right now, which disables him from controlling the status window and retrieving the holy oil. Li Yang reassures Chumhai that he can still get it out. Suddenly, he punches himself in the chest with his glowing fist, claiming that the item will drop out once he dies. Man, this guy is crazy. As soon as Liang dies, his items drop from the inventory, including the holy oil. Chun-Hai is still in disbelief that Liang killed himself to save him, and he can't help but think that he might have misunderstood him. With his powerful titles, Chun-Hai could easily escape the banshees using just his speed. He was simply trying to finish the dungeon and didn't expect Liang to die for him. Nevertheless, he firmly grasps the bottle of holy oil, determined to honor Liang's sacrifice. He pours the oil into his sword, and the banshees immediately surround him. He calls out the noisy creatures, telling them to shut up. Triggered, the banshees immediately rush towards Chun-Hai to end him. With his blessed long sword, equipped with the power to destroy evil creatures, Chun-Hai easily asserts who's boss. Elsewhere, in an abandoned building, a mysterious woman exits the dungeon. Her title equips her with the ability to go into stealth mode. Old Driver senses that someone just exited the dungeon, but Lao Liao sees no one. So he says that Old Driver must have been mistaken. Meanwhile, the woman, who was in the dungeon raid the whole time, knew that the sellers set up a trap for a dungeon that couldn't be raided. They entice adventurers of similar skill levels to attempt a mission they can't complete. These adventurers are sent there under false pretenses only to meet a deadly fate. Old Driver and Lao Liao will then steal their items or kill them if they come out alive. It turns out that this woman has been hired by a client to investigate the death of his son, who allegedly purchased a slot from the sly sellers. Meanwhile, Chun-Hai slices the last banshee in half. He immediately heads to Leader, asking him if he's capable of standing up. Leader replies that he's struggling, as the banshee's screams have severely damaged his internal organs. He then asks if the others have died, and Chun-Hai affirms it, stressing that none of them survived. Leader is disheartened by the news, but he's also surprised by Chun-Hai, as he must have a strong title or profession. Chun-Hai chuckles, saying that Leader should keep that information a secret. However, Leader says that he's the only one around, so it doesn't matter. To ensure that Chun-Hai would spare him, Leader strikes up a deal. He agrees to cooperate with Chun-Hai, promising to keep their secret and share all the rewards from the raid. As a gesture of trust, he mentioned they could consider a one-way contract as a safety precaution. However, Chun-Hai mentions that he can still keep his secret if he kills Leader. Plus, he can save himself from a contract. However, Leader replies that he won't get his mission calculation reward if he does this. The rewards from a high-level dungeon are no joke, so he lets Chun-Hai assess his actions. With his sword pointing at Leader, Chun-Hai remains quiet, seemingly thinking deeply about the proposal. The Leader adds that the sellers likely wait at the dungeon exit, prepared to ambush any survivors. Old Driver and Lao Liao, skilled combatants known as carrion vultures, are formidable adversaries with skills comparable to adventurers. Leader emphasizes that he can act as bait, while Chun-Hai covers the attacks. At this point, taking Leader would be Chun-Hai's best bet. Back at the abandoned building, the dungeon's entrance indicates that someone's about to exit. Lao Liao says that this is what it looks like when someone is coming. Old Driver, on the other hand, accepts that he must have seen wrongly a while ago. Just then, Chun-Hai emerges from the dungeon while assisting Leader. Noticing that the dungeon is collapsing behind them, Old Driver can barely believe that they cleared the dungeon. Suddenly, Chun-Hai drops his pretense of helping the Leader and swiftly lunges toward Old Driver with his long sword, impaling him. Blood gushes from the man's body, leaving Lao Liao in shock. He freezes upon noticing Chun-Hai's title, indicating he possesses the Lone Wolf title. Chun-Hai's eyes glow red with merciless intent, as he tells Lao Liao that he took out the weaker one first. With his new titles, Dance with Death and One Step, One Kill, Chun-Hai is prepared to seek justice for the adventurers who were killed. As Chun-Hai pulls his sword out of Old Driver's lifeless body, he tells Lao Liao that he's stupid for not thinking that their victims will someday seek revenge. Lao Liao immediately equips a new title, Lao Liao, in response, hastily equips a new title, Run, Scary Cat. Boosting his agility by 2 points, brandishing his poisoned dagger, he warns Chun-Hai to keep his distance. Chun-Hai, on the other hand, sarcastically states that he's very scared. Suddenly, the two engage in a frenzied chase, their movements so swift that they blur to the naked eye. Meanwhile, Leader, observing from a corner, senses the intensity of their clash. Despite his experience as a level 5 adventurer, he finds himself outmatched by the speed and ferocity of Chun-Hai and Lao Liao's battle. Speculating that they must be at least level 7 or 8 to move with such agility, he realizes the truth behind the saying that one's potential for greatness is determined long before reaching level 5. It doesn't take long for Lao Liao's luck to run out, and he soon finds himself injured by Chen Hai's sword. Even with his title, he's still evidently slower than his opponent. Based on Chen Hai's performance, his agility must be 17 or 18 points. Chen Hai smirks, telling Lao Liao to take a good guess. Well, someone's getting cocky, for good reason, I guess. Lao Liao suddenly summons his status window, retrieving something from his inventory. He reveals a vial containing a mysterious green substance. He smashes this into the floor, equipping him with a new title, Toxic Carrier. Lao Liao reveals that he was supposed to use this in Liang, but he supposes that Chen Hai might deserve the beating this time. Out of nowhere, Lao Liao appears in front of Chen Hai, telling him to feel the mutated spider's poison. He claims to have bought this from the black market at an expensive price. Okay, fun fact, I guess. Chen Hai struggles to get away from Lao Liao, but the poison inevitably infects him. This makes Lao Liao ecstatic, realizing that Chen Hai has weaker poison resistance compared to normal people. Just when Lao Liao thinks he has the upper hand, Chen Hai swings his sword, narrowly missing him. Lao Liao chuckles, claiming that Chen Hai is too slow for his current title. With the infection spreading to Chen Hai's eyes and arms, he asks if this is the killing method that Lao Liao arranged for the survivors. Lao Liao confirms this, adding that it's a poison produced at level 7 spider dungeons. It's known to deteriorate a lower-ranked adventurer's strength, speed, and physique. Lao Liao was proud to say that 4 level 5 adventurers have already been killed through this evil method, and Chen Hai is about to be the 5th one on the list. However, Chen Hai is unimpressed, saying that this trump card is too simple, and there must be more cunning ways of killing him. This offends Lao Liao. He asserts that he has more tricks up his sleeve. He claims that with his current title, everything in his body is poisonous, including the air he breathes out, his sweat, and even the blood in his veins. The longer Chen Hai fights against him, the more poison he will be. Lao Liao plans to keep pestering Chen Hai until he meets his inevitable death. Meanwhile, Leader listens to Lao Liao's dramatic monologues, and he can't help but think that not even Liang can beat this guy. He also theorizes that Chen Hai will eventually die, if he can end this duel as soon as possible. No wonder Lao Liao was confident in being a carrion vulture. He had this title all along. Unfazed, Chen Hai merely replies that he overestimated Lao Liao. He summons his status window, and he equips the Dance with Death title, which neutralizes the poison in his body. Chen Hai swiftly lunges to Lao Liao's position, clashing his long sword into the man's dagger. Lao Liao can't point out where Chen Hai's sudden surge of speed came from. With a sinister grin, Chen Hai tells him to take a guess. Suddenly, Chen Hai slashes Lao Liao with his long sword, causing him to spew out blood. Refusing to surrender, Lao Liao attempts to stab Chen Hai. However, Chen Hai only dodges, and he reiterates Lao Liao's words earlier, saying he's too slow. Lao Liao can't believe the power that his opponent possesses. He merely has the Lone Wolf title. How can he be stronger when Lao Liao previously beat level 5 adventurers? Just then, Chen Hai fatally impales Lao Liao with his sword. Coldly, he remarks that Lao Liao remained confined within his comfort zone, blind to the scenes witnessed by those intimately acquainted with death. Wow, when did Chen Hai equip the Shakespeare title? Lao Liao surprisingly replies with a long monologue. I'm surprised he can still yap that much. He claims that those drowned are often able to swim, and if one walks with death, you won't get far with it. Only by preying on the weaker adventurer will grant you enough force and resources to compete with consortium and official adventurers before level 10. Firmly, Lao Liao asserts that his path is the right one. Chen Hai counters that what Lao Liao did was a common approach, but pushing the limits of mortality doesn't always lead beyond death. With resolve, Chen Hai draws his sword, swiftly ending Lao Liao's life. Oh, finally, that scene was dragging. Meanwhile, Leader can't believe that someone as strong as Lao Liang has been defeated. Suddenly, Chen Hai gestures for silence, placing his finger to his lips, signaling that Leader should keep the events witnessed a secret. Days later, Chen Hai finds himself confined in a hospital. As he relaxes in his bed, Shu Mao enters the room with a fruit basket. Chen Hai asks why he visited, and Shu Mao explains that he heard all about the last raid. He's amazed that Chen Hai's first dungeon contained a monster that was immune to physical attacks, and when he finally cleared it, he was ambushed by carrion vultures. It's quite a tragic story, but Chen Hai explains that it's worth it because he gained the survival after death title. Shu Mao agrees, saying that it must be a blessing in disguise. He adds that the legendary adventurers in that raid must have been shocked after facing an opponent stronger than them, considering they're at level 5. Suddenly, Shu Mao reminds Chun Hai not to carelessly reveal his main title, as this is fatal to adventurers. It turns out that Chun Hai does not only have to look out for monsters. Chun Hai scratches his head, embarrassed by his naivety, but also thankful for Shu Mao. Unbeknownst to Chun Hai, Shu Mao has done a lot of research about what truly happened in the recent raid. Chun Hai's present title is for group combats, but his skills shouldn't be strong enough to kill Lao Liao, an old driver. This leaves Shu Mao with no other conclusion. Chun Hai is hiding a much more powerful title. Meanwhile, Chun Hai summons his status window and removes his title. He notices that Shu Mao is staring at him, so he asks if there's anything in his face. Shu Mao snaps out of his deep thoughts, and he excuses himself to return to the gym. Before leaving, he tells Chun Hai to report to the gym as soon as he recovers. It's only a matter of time before Chun Hai's body-shaking plans approach the second phase. As soon as Shu Mao leaves the room, Chun Hai turns to the empty bed beside him, which Leader used to occupy. A few nights ago, Chun Hai asked Leader why he was quitting the raid-type adventurer life. Leader explains that the recent incident made him realize that he doesn't have the capability and talent to become a legendary rank adventurer. If he does improve, he knows his full potential will only be around level 11 or 15. However, reaching that is far from possible, and there are great risks. Rather than dying, he'd rather earn money while being at level 6 or 10, which will also secure his retirement in the future. However, it tells Chun Hai not to do what he's doing, reminding him of his potential to become a legendary adventurer. He does tell him to change his lone wolf habit though. Chun Hai asks why. So Leader explains that although going solo might boost exit and clearance rates and net more loot, titles, and drops, it's only effective in dungeons up to level 10. Once Chun Hai hits levels 11 to 15, things get tougher, and brute force won't cut it. Leader insists that to reach legendary adventurer status, Chun Hai needs a raiding team before hitting level 10. But he also warns that sticking to levels 11 to 15 solo could lead to being ripped off or misled by other adventurers, resulting in significant losses. Now Chun Hai's left wondering whether he should heed Leader's advice. Elsewhere, the stealth lady from the raid meets up with Cao Hua Wang, her employer. Cao delivers the news that the individuals responsible for his son's death have been dealt with, leaving only 2 survivors from the recent raid. He then presents pictures of the survivors and inquires about their involvement in avenging his son's death. After careful examination, the woman selects Chun Hai's photo, indicating that he's the one who killed the vultures. Meanwhile, at Yun Shiyao City Hospital's morgue, an unexpected sight unfolds as a dungeon materializes within one of the incinerators. Electricity crackles around the incinerator, and a timer ominously ticks away, signaling that time is running. The following day, Chun Hai goes on a stroll in the hospital grounds. Suddenly, 2 thugs approach him, and they seem to know his name. One of the thugs, younger brother, asks if he's the guy who cleared the Banshee dungeon, because they're interested in obtaining the clearance reward that he got. He also reassures Chun Hai that they will pay him for it. However, Chun Hai nonchalantly crosses his arms, saying he's not interested. Younger brother is pissed by his arrogance, while his partner, older brother, laughs at the fact that Chun Hai thinks they're in some negotiation. Aren't their names just creative? Suddenly, younger brother sits next to Chun Hai, demanding that Chun Hai give him his rewards. He even taunts Chun Hai, threatening to make him suffer. Suddenly, a nurse screams at the thugs, telling them not to harass her patients. It seems like this woman is known as a threat, because as soon as the brothers see her, they immediately leave. Meanwhile, the nurse tells Chun Hai to find her if the thugs bother him again. She also reassures him that her big brother is a level 10 adventurer, so the thugs better not mess with her. Chun Hai bashfully thanks her, but the nurse suddenly gets emotional, saying she should be thanking him. She explains that her friend died in the Banshee Forest and Chun Hai is to be thanked for clearing the dungeon. Meanwhile, the dungeon in the morgue explodes. This causes a strong surge of electricity to surround the hospital building, signifying an impending crisis. Suddenly, the nurse dissolves right in front of Chun Hai. He can barely believe it, but it seems like he's witnessing the dungeon rampage phenomenon, where people are randomly pulled into a dungeon. Soon after, he also notices that he's dissolving, and soon after, he teleports into a dungeon. Chun Hai's eyes widen as he witnesses the scene in front of him. It's a massive graveyard with an exit mission of defeating 100 skeleton soldiers. To clear the mission, he has to survive for an hour. Seriously, give this man a break. The group is surrounded by a million graves, and there's no way to escape. However, the nurse orients the group not to panic. She reckons they were probably pulled into the dungeon, which is most likely beginner ranked. She then instructs the group to open their status windows and confirm their missions. Meanwhile, the brother-in-law of the Adventurers Association entrance manager, Joe Duh, is pissed that he got sucked into the dungeon. He only came to the hospital for a dental checkup and didn't expect to fight for his life. On the other hand, Chun-Hai opens his status window and discovers that they truly have to fight the undead for an hour. He also discovers that it is no beginner-ranked dungeon, but a level 5 survival dungeon. At this rate, the group will be nothing but dead meat. Meanwhile, at the Adventurers Association building, entrance manager Shang Li is puzzled to learn that a beginner-ranked dungeon phenomenon has occurred in the hospital. According to reports, 20 people have been pulled into the dungeon. Shang Li rushes to the hospital and seeks updates upon arrival. A worker informs him that they've compiled a list of the missing individuals, revealing that only 3 are adventurers, while the rest are civilians. Additionally, the worker informs Shang Li that they've located the dungeon, but there's bad news. Inside the dungeon, the group compares their exit missions and realizes they all have the same one, except for the thugs, younger brother and older brother, who have different missions. Younger brother explains that it's normal in survival-type dungeons, where exit missions are tailored to the challenger's combat ability. Chun-Hai likely has a different one too. Meanwhile, the civilians panic about what they should do. Chun-Hai then calls everyone's attention, orienting them about the dangers of the dungeon. He also instructs them to arm themselves. With the weapons scattered around the place, he instructs them to team up with a group consisting of 3 to 5 members, and together they must fulfill the exit mission and leave as soon as possible. However, one of the civilians is offended that Chun-Hai is telling them what to do. One guy even introduces the idea that Chun-Hai wants them to leave right away, because he will keep all the loot for himself. Offended, Chun-Hai argues that he's only concerned because the dungeon truly is dangerous. The nurse steps in, asserting that Chun-Hai is a capable adventurer who has successfully cleared a challenging beginner-ranked dungeon. She explains that he has collaborated with other adventurers to combat thugs who exploit beginner-ranked dungeons for evil purposes. The civilians are shocked and impressed by this revelation, with some recalling hearing about Chun-Hai on the news. One person mentions hearing about the thugs who killed others for loot, adding that numerous lives were lost. Amidst the discussion, the nurse advises the group to trust Chun-Hai's judgment. Though some of the stories may be exaggerated, Chun-Hai is relieved that they now understand the potential dangers lurking within these dungeons. Joe Duh suddenly questions their chances of survival, especially since they're just civilians facing a dangerous dungeon filled with hostile skeletons. He points out the difficulty of fighting skeletons, expressing concern that the weaker individuals will be left vulnerable when the stronger ones team up. He rudely asks Chun-Hai if he considers this possibility, causing panic among the group, who now insist on fighting together. Unbeknownst to them, Joe Duh had planned this all along, recalling advice from his brother-in-law to manipulate gullible individuals by giving them a platform to voice their opinions. He intends to use the civilians as leverage to pressure the adventurers into doing his bidding. Meanwhile, Chun-Hai takes a deep breath and assures the nurse to trust him. He instructs her and a child to follow him as he leads them to complete their exit mission. However, Joe Duh frantically questions why they're following Chun-Hai, attempting to sow doubt in his mind by suggesting he should stay behind to save everyone. The group voices their concerns, pressuring Chun-Hai to help them complete their exit missions. To their shock, Chun-Hai reveals that he's not an official adventurer and therefore has no obligation to protect them. He then turns to Joe Duh, threatening him to stop wearing down his morals or he'll break his leg before he exits the dungeon. "Ha, serves you right, you blue-haired parrot." Joe Duh falls to the ground, horrified by the thought of having a broken leg in a dungeon this deadly. As Chun-Hai leaves with the nurse and the child, the group is bewildered by his lack of basic morality to protect the elderly and weak. One person suggests that Chun-Hai's moral standards likely didn't meet the qualifications of an official adventurer. Suddenly, younger and older brother depart from the group, leaving the civilians wondering about their intentions. Younger brother explains that Chun-Hai was correct, as they must survive for an hour. It will only become more challenging over time. He advises the civilians to complete their exit missions before the difficulty level increases. However, deep down, younger brother's true motivation is to escape before Joe Duh corrupts his mind. So he's not as dumb as he looks. Meanwhile, in the hospital, Shang Li is taken aback as he observes the dungeon entrance firsthand. the head of business questions what's wrong with the dungeon, but Shang-Li emphasizes that their primary concern should be the number of people exiting before time runs out. Elsewhere, Chun-Hai eliminates a skeleton as a demonstration for the nurse and the child. He then hands a sword to the nurse, telling her to attack the skeleton's neck as it emerges from the grave. Despite her hesitance, the nurse takes the sword. However, she wonders how Chun-Hai can fend for himself without a weapon. He calmly replies that it's no big fuss, as he plans to do a little training using the skeletons. Chun-Hai quickly retrieves an axe from his inventory, ready to do a little workout sesh. Meanwhile, younger and older brothers smash some skeletons to secure their exit mission. As older brother uses his bare fists to deal with the undead, young brother can't help but be bored. He can't stand it anymore, so he tells his brother he wants to swap after this batch of skeletons. On the other hand, Chun-Hai gained a new title, the Undead Killer. This grants him with 2 points on the Undead Charm, while also equipping him with a 2-point boost in damage. After a series of bone chopping, Chun-Hai realizes that some graves are not unlimited. This is good for the civilians, as it implies they can complete the exit mission more easily. However, it poses a challenge for experts like Chun-Hai, whose mission difficulty is higher compared to everyone else's. The curse of being too perfect, am I right? Just then, the nurse informs Chun-Hai that she and the child have cleared the area of skeletons and are moving to another location to hunt down more. Meanwhile, the civilians stick together in a group, with Joe instructing the injured individuals to move to the back, while the rest fend off the skeletons emerging from the graves. He tries to motivate everyone, reminding them they only have 40 minutes left. 10 minutes later, the civilians successfully cleared the area of skeletons. One of them remarks that being an adventurer seems easy, while another suggests Chun-Hai may have exaggerated the dungeon's hostility. Overhearing them, Joe sees this in anger. He knows that weak skeletons don't necessarily mean the dungeon's difficulty is low. In fact, weaker skeletons could indicate stronger monsters lurking within. As time passes, the dungeon's difficulty will forcibly increase, from beginner rank to its limit at level 5, the highest standard. Joe checks his status board and grows worried. He realizes the dungeon has fewer resources than expected. Despite fighting for some time, he's only managed to kill 4 skeletons. If the next 10 minutes pass, the dungeon's difficulty will increase, but if the following 10 minutes no new skeletons will emerge, Joe must find a way to defeat 6 skeletons by himself. With 35 minutes remaining, the nurse and the child meet with Chun-Hai to provide an update. The child has successfully completed his exit mission. However, the nurse still needs to eliminate 8 more skeletons, as she has sacrificed all of her chances for the child. With this, Chun-Hai instructs the child to leave first, while he and the nurse continue to hunt down the skeletons. After they finish the mission, they will meet him outside. The child enthusiastically agrees to Chun-Hai's plan. Back at the hospital, Shang-Li is shocked to know that no one has cleared this dungeon for the last 10 years. Even veteran adventurers struggle to make it out alive. If that is the case, then Shang-Li could only imagine what would happen to the civilians recently sucked into the dungeon. Meanwhile, the head of business wonders how a dungeon like this can exist. She's also baffled by the thought that the adventurer's survival rates are not that high, even if the adventurer is strong. She also wonders why it's called reverse. Shang-Li explains that the dungeon operates with an expert grave setting, where all adventurers receive the same exit missions, while the difficulty level for newcomers is 10 times easier. Completing the mission triggers the emergence of a dungeon boss, whose combat abilities far exceed what the adventurers can handle. This boss actively hunts down all within the dungeon, putting even veteran adventurers at risk of dying. Realizing that Joe has been sucked into the dungeon, Shang-Li can only hope that he has grasped the harsh reality of their situation. With the race against time to escape the dungeon underway, the stakes couldn't be higher. Meanwhile, the child successfully exits the dungeon. Chun-Hai then assures the nurse that he will assist her in defeating more skeletons, so she can focus on looking after the child. Elsewhere, upon the child's emergence from the dungeon, Shang-Li is disappointed to see him instead of Joe. As the dungeon transitions to its second stage, anxiety grips everyone. Aware of what's to come, Joe quickly forms a team with Lu Ming and Wang Ziyang, hoping to increase their chances of survival. Meanwhile, older brother informs younger brother that someone has exited the dungeon, speculating it might be Chun-Hai. However, younger brother doubts this, noting that Chun-Hai is left with 2 responsibilities, the nurse and the child. Being an adventurer, younger brother knows it won't be easy for Chun-Hai to find and defeat 100 skeletons. Suddenly, Younger brother notices a glowing figure, observing them from the mountains. His horror mounts as he recognizes Claude, the Death Knight. Claude's strength is so godlike that his rank cannot be determined.